Admiral Ghormade, General Chaturvedi, General Kulkarni, and all the distinguished guests, the diplomats, excellencies who have come to this event, academia, professionals, students. I would like all of you to give a big round of applause for our panelists, led by Shri N.K. Singh sir and the distinguished panelists. Now, students, those who take interest in all the current affairs, economics, I am very sure you do not need any introduction of N.K. Singh sir, but it's my duty to introduce the stellar panelists who are here. Ladies and gentlemen, Shri N.K. Singh is a distinguished civil servant, a seasoned policymaker, eminent economist, and president of the Institute of Economic Growth. He was chairman of 15th Finance Commission and the FRBM Review Committee, former Revenue Secretary, Expenditure Secretary, and Secretary to Prime Minister Vajpayee ji. He also served in the Ministry of Commerce, focusing on trade and policy. He was member of Rajya Sabha from 2008 to 2014 and served on key committees including Finance and External Affairs. He was co-convener of the G20 expert group on MDB platforms. He is recipient of Japan's Order of Rising Sun and an honorary fellow of London School of Economics. We are indeed privileged to have Shri N.K. Singh sir as the moderator for this panel on Responsible Nation Index. May I now request the team of WIF. I would request Jagdish Mukhi sir to kindly come and felicitate our honorable distinguished guest. May I request our team to felicitate Dr. Lavish Bhandari. Dr. Lavish Bhandari is a prolific scholar with PhD in economics from Boston University. He has taught at IIT Delhi and Boston University. Dr. Prachi Mishra. Her journey spans the world's pinnacles, chief of IMF Systemic Issues Division. Shri Neelkant Mishra ji, IIT Kanpur Gold Medalist in Computer Science and Engineering, Distinguished Alumnus Award and recipient of the Institute's highest honor. Dr. Mishra has also been advisor in the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would request the sequence of the program is the panel discussion would be moderated by Shri N.K. Singh sir on the issue till 4:45 p.m. After that, we would have former President of India, Shri Ramnath Kovind ji, coming here at 5 p.m. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I am greatly honored to be present here on this important occasion of the release of the first Responsible Nation Index done by this organization. We begin by thanking the organizers, Ramlal ji, who has been greatly instrumental in orchestrating this. To others, Sudhanshu ji, many other people from the organization who are interested in this subject. Colonel Akash Patil, thank you so much. Jagdish Mukhi ji, and all my co-panelists. So we live in a world today, as they say, on surfeit of data. There is no dearth of data. Data is all over. Indices of multiple kinds. I made a quick calculation of how many indices exist. There are, to the surprise of all of you, 400 indices which exist, of one kind or the other. A whole variety of human activity have been indexed together. So the first question really is, in such a crowded place of multiplicity of indices, is it useful to have one more index, one more kind of issues on which we should engage ourselves? I'll come to the conclusion later, but this is one more index in a crowded place of indices. Also, I think that we need to worry when we talk of responsible nations. What does responsibility mean? It means different things to different people. Does it inject a kind of an ideological bias or a preference on a preferred model of economic development or a preferred set of policies? Or is it in that sense a neutral kind of an expression? So the value of indices, and indices measure. Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize some years ago on behavioral economics, had said that there is a concept with which I'm sure my fellow panelists would be familiar, called behavioral economics and nudge economics. So indices have a value of nudging people and changing behavioral characteristics to make them more responsible. This brings us to the other central question, that responsible nations, the meaning of responsible nations, to some extent depends on the prism through which responsibility is conceived. We have conceived this index, or what is going to be released, conceives them on three important parameters. The parameters in which of behavioral conducts, and that these behavioral conduct which is embedded in this goes beyond the issues which are very, very obvious on external behavior, on factors of internal governance, and the conduct of global responsibility. These are a very broad set of ranging questions on which it is difficult to arrive at a degree of unanimity which would have instant applause by all concerned. So I think the first question which we need to ask ourselves is that the index which is before us, is it robust enough? Do we need to modify the robustness of this? No one better than, for instance, Lavish, to go into the quality of data and the quality of the robustness of this index. No one better, for instance, than you, Prachi, to point out on the robustness of the criteria which have been used. Do we need to, for instance, add an important factor which is intangible? The factor, for instance, of what we see every day. The factor of geopolitical uncertainties. Geopolitical uncertainty in itself per se influences conduct, it influences behavior, but to some extent, it cannot be converted into a monetary component. And yet, geopolitical uncertainties in the geopolitical times which we are living through is an important factor. It's an important factor in shaping behavior, in shaping investor perception, in shaping decisions which have important economic consequences. So we need to ask that question. Should the index of these three things which we have selected, does it need to be broadened to include one or two other important factors, difficult as it might be, intangible as they might appear. This is one of the issues on which I think we need to deliberate. So as we move forward, I have three very distinguished panelists with me. Time is short. We will engage in them, but there are 5 issues on which I want and request, no particular order, in which I'm requesting the panelists to give me the benefit of their advice. First and foremost is do we need another index? Would that add value to making nations' conduct more responsible? Please give some thought on that. Second issue on which I'm requesting our panelists to comment, do we need to broaden the criteria to make it a little more robust than what is contained in the ingredients in this outstanding work which has been done by JNU and by the Mumbai Institute of Management? Do we need, and in what way do we need to make that a little more granular and a little more robust? The third is, how do we make these indices neutral, taking off the ideological bias? Ideological of what? Are we attaching importance to what is known as legitimate concerns of democracy and development? Last year's Nobel Prize was won by 3 people. The theme of those people, which they won the prize, was democracy and development. India is one of the rare countries which has harmonized that high rates of economic growth are compatible with the democracy, compatible with liberal values which democracy entails. Values of freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of being able to decide on the granularity of it. Democracy and development is, I would say, one of India's most important achievements. Indeed, I'm happy to share with the panelists, and they were not there in the conferment of the honorary degree, which I was very privileged to receive from the London School of Economics. The theme of my speech, or acceptance speech, was democracy and development, and that this 21st century will be an Indian century. And why did I argue for that? One of the key factors was democracy and development. The second issue on which we need to come to some degree of a conclusion is what happens if nations behave irresponsibly. What are the consequences of irresponsible behavior? A very obvious one is name and shame. Name and shame has more meaning than would be apparent. But we need to go beyond naming and shaming. Nobel laureates have said that beyond naming and shaming, reputation matters. And reputation is an intangible quality. Responsible nations have a reputation which they need to safeguard with integrity. And so I think that these are some of the issues on which I'm happy to be able to engage with my panelists. I've given some broad structure to comment on. I'd expect the 3 very distinguished panelists to choose their own sequence and to then give us the benefit of their comments. We can have an interactive session, even though the time is short. Can I request you, Prachi, to be the first one to make your comments?
Thank you, Shri N.K. Singh, sir, Sudhanshu ji, and World Intellectual Foundation for the kind invitation. It's really my pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel on a very important topic. So let me start by, probably tackling the question which Shri N.K. Singh, sir, mentioned: why should we have a new index, and why the Responsible Nations Index really matters. In my view, constructing this index of responsible nations is an excellent initiative. And let me say why, for 2 reasons. First, measuring responsibility, in my view, is genuinely novel. While we often discuss, accountability in domestic context, for example, to the parliament, to citizens, this initiative, in my view, combines both, internal and external dimensions of responsibility. And most importantly, what makes it, novel is the fact that it tries to quantify these aspects, and which is very, very, very meaningful for, which is crucial for, meaningful evaluation. Second reason why I say this is an excellent initiative is, think about it, for an organization in a large emerging market like India to evaluate, countries on global responsibility is really both unique and commendable. And let me illustrate why this matters with a concrete example. So back in 2013, about more than a decade ago, I was part of an Indian delegation to the G20. And you may recall, I think those of us who are students of economics, that the then US Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke had just hinted in a speech about reducing the pace of asset purchases, the so-called quantitative easing, or QE, you must have heard. Sometime in the future, the US economy had started recovering, so he just hinted that, look, sometime in the future, we are going to, reduce the pace of these asset purchases. And believe it or not, this mere statement actually disrupted financial markets globally, with countries having weaker macroeconomic fundamentals suffering disproportionately. And if you recall, a decade and a half ago, India was really among the fragile five. So between May and September 2013, rupee had depreciated by 15 to 20%, and markets for all Indian assets had reacted negatively. So at the G20 meeting in Moscow, if I recall correctly, my team and I had made a case that, look, advanced economies must recognize the responsibility, and that, the power of the global hegemon should go hand in hand with global accountability. And that a central bank managing the global reserve currency like the US dollar must consider the spillover effects of its action. Guess what? The response was totally dismissive. It's our action, but it's your problem. And emerging markets are always complaining. You complained when the US Federal Reserve introduced quantitative easing and faced capital inflows. And now you are complaining when we reverse course. Go and fix your institutions instead. This is the context, and this is why precisely I say that measuring global responsibility and ranking of countries and fostering debate around these issues, all initiated by a large emerging market like India, represents a very important contribution. So let me stop here, sir, and maybe I can take on the data and the method issues later on.
Well, thank you, Prachi, but you haven't answered one question, which is germane to you. If you believe that except for prejudice, there are other factors, you have worked for long in the International Monetary Fund. There are many others here who have worked in similar kinds of international organizations. I found Mr. Singh, who has worked in the WT in the audience. I find Ambassador Konari, who has worked with the United Nations and with UNESCO and many other organizations. Why do you think that there is such an hesitation, except prejudice, in these multilateral institutions not adopting something so obvious as a responsible nations index? May equally, since you asked a question on your G20 experience, what we are currently encountering is my dollar, it's your problem. The famous work of Ken Rogoff. So I think there are a lot of nations who are being punished on account of their subservience to the dollar turn around and say, indeed, this is an irony of circumstances. My dollar, but your problem. Prachi.
So that's an excellent point, and actually it relates to some of my comments on the data issues. That is, this is an excellent initiative. However, we can make the index even more robust by including an even wider set of indicators, some of those which you hinted at. For example, if you think about external responsibility, under international economic relations, I think there are certain measures which we must include. For example, protectionism. I think protectionism is at the minimum average tariffs and ideally non-tariff barriers such as subsidies, though these are harder to quantify. And given that Trump-era tariffs remain central to global affairs, and advanced economies have really been frequent users of these non-tariff barriers, especially in sectors such as agriculture, I think these protectionist measures have enormous spillover effects for the rest of the world, and accounting for them would be crucial to measuring external responsibility. Similarly, sir, the point you raised about international organizations, I think external responsibility must reflect shareholdings in international organizations relative to the economic size of the countries. So as most of you would know, quota reforms in the Bretton Woods institutions have mostly been lip service. And most of these organizations are basically controlled by a few systemic economies showing little willingness to increase emerging market share. And this asymmetry, I believe, must be reflected in this index. So expanding the list of indicators to exactly reflect some of the fundamental issues you mentioned can really make the index more robust.
Thank you, Prachi. Neelkant, we keep reading your writings, I do, particularly in the Times of India, on important economic and social factors. Has it ever struck you, Neelkant, that in all your writing, you are taking the contemporary scenario as an ipso facto, and that you are not questioning the very fundamental factors which underline a very steep sense of prejudice and preferences which are being given to a particular set of conduct. And the benchmarks, therefore, which are set are benchmark loaded against us. Neelkant.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I'm again grateful for the invitation to speak on such an important occasion. I think it's a very important index. In the last, I'd say, year or so, we have moved to a regime or a global regime where might seems to be right. So irresponsibility is rife. What I think is needed is a measure which the like-minded folks, perhaps who are not in the US and China, can rally around, and creating a framework which is objective, trustworthy, I think becomes very important. So as we think about responsibility, it's also important, as much as we look at what the US is doing, to look at why the global trade regime actually broke down. And so there has been irresponsible financial repression in China. There is an artificial reduction of cost of capital. There is significant misuse of their balance sheet, in the sense that there are industries which don't make money for years, if not decades, and yet they are able to survive, and in the process, they misuse the norms of the WTO to actually hurt industries and their development across the world. It was this irresponsible behavior which has led to, or which has actually accelerated the US's behavior of breaking down the trade regime. So I think having an index which very often I've seen the data exists. So there are centers in Europe, for example, which track Chinese investment. There are centers in Latin America which do a lot of research. There are several centers in India, but I think combining them together into something which then the whole world can rally around and anchor to is, I think, a very important measure, sir, to pressure the people who are being irresponsible. In that, if I may add, I think the expansion, just the second part of your question. So there is clearly, I think, a lot of thought that has gone into this excellent index, like energy use, energy intensity. I would add to that things like material use. In fact, one of the meetings with the Honorable Prime Minister, he said something which is very deep, that if we have to live sustainably on this earth, we have to think about why is it that every measure of economic growth means you have to consume more energy and consume more materials. So steel usage, sand usage, aluminum usage, how wasteful is that? How can a country like China consume 700 kilos per capita for 15 years, which no one in history has done, and then start dumping a lot of it in the rest of the world? I think these are measures which then become very important and will be welcome additions. Lastly, there need to be, and there will be subjective measures. And so the point you raised about credibility of the index, I think in some of those, and there are several which we find, which are global subjective indices, which seem to be biased, and there seems to be a deep prejudice against emerging markets. In order to not replicate that mistake, I think finding committees which are more balanced, fairer, and more credible, I think then become very important when we are looking at some of the segments which are subjective.
Thank you, Neelkant. Before I move to the third distinguished panelist, can I ask you a question, Neelkant? Since you mentioned something, I have really been concerned since I was involved in trade policy related issues for a reasonable part of my life before issues of finance. Has it struck you that isn't it ironic that the World Trade Organization, the successor to the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which has succeeded, made the WTO a universal entity? You all subscribe to the WTO. The Americans were the front runner in pioneering the creation of the World Trade Organization. China was a lead comer and a hesitant entry to the World Trade Organization. But look at the irony of circumstances, Neelkant. The Chinese gamed the system, gamed the entire WTO. The outcome we saw day before yesterday. The surplus of China day before yesterday was $1.2 trillion. Was the surplus, trade surplus of China. What does that mean? Is it only a statistics? It only means this. It's a permanent deflationary force for a long time in the global economy, considering that under the eyes of the WTO, it enabled and used the WTO for a $1.2 trillion surplus, which has far-reaching impact on the export capability of many poor countries, on Asian countries, on the rest of the world. A deflationary force for a very, very long time in the global economy. So see the irony of circumstances. The US is now the defending end. The Chinese have created this huge excess capacity in the global economy, all by gaming a multilateral development institution. This would be equally true. Prachi was right that the dominant shareholders of the World Bank, of multilateral development banks, of other international entities are facing the same ironic circumstances. How does one get over this? How do nations begin to act responsibly? Which is what the raison d'etre of today's discussion, in a manner that we do not repeat and fall a prey to this one kind of an example which I have mentioned, Nilkant.
Yeah, so sir, I think this is really the crux of the problem. So why didn't? Because given all of the preponderance of research that exists, which show that China has been doing this for 20 years, why is it that they were not called out? Why is it that there wasn't a global forum? And I think this again shows that some of the entities which wield power, they had their self-interest in supporting them to the point, and they have now supported them to a point at which they can't beat them following the same rules, and now they're saying that we will not be able to follow the same rules. And so WTO, the judges' appointments, the dispute resolution, all of that has completely failed. So I think therefore the need of the hour is in, and indices like these or measures like these can actually be an anchor around which like-minded entities can rally around and then see the point is making villains out of a couple of entities may not also be very helpful, but at the same time finding objective measures, because what China is able to do today is at the expense of their own people. So they have suppressed consumption, and therefore there is, I think, there are a very large number of Chinese thinkers who think that this is not the right way forward.
Which brings me to that point before I move to Lavish. What happens if nations do not fulfill their obligations to their own citizens? If nations suppress the consumption of their own citizens, is that responsible? Or is it irresponsible to the human race? It's a question on which there's a degree of penumbra of uncertainty, given the parameters within which we function. But thank you for bringing that up. Can I turn to Lavish? You are one of the most well-known experts on data, granularity of data, on the vast work which you have done, particularly in many states. I look forward, Lavish, to your analysis of state in a federal entity of this kind. I'd like to comment a bit on that. When you look at the comments, which states in India, we are not going to that, but if you were to use the quality of the data, and by the way, Sudhanshuji reminded me that we have not gone to primary data. The data which has been used here has been data done by credible international institutions. I'd like to comment a bit on the data, on the quality of data, on the robustness of the methodology used, and what could be a way of improving that quality. Lavish.
Thank you, sir. So first, I must thank the organizers, yourself, Sudhanshuji, for inviting me here. Okay. So I actually looked into the paper shared with me, and I must congratulate you for some deep work. A lot of literature survey must have gone into this, because I found indices and measures which I never knew existed, and believe you me, I've looked at quite a few in my life. So congratulations for finding some. And I also actually looked at some of these indices, and they were fairly well done. So again, congratulations. You haven't really picked out any random here and there. So, when you look at any rating, the first and the most important thing is, what is our objective? And here, I was again very glad when I read the paper, is that the objective is deeply moral. It's about responsibility. I haven't found in so many years any index which has been created for something which is so deeply ingrained in all of us, which is to do the right thing. So again, I think it's a great exercise and it must be continued. Having said that, the question then is, coming to the kinds of issues that you mentioned. I used to do a lot of ratings, and one set of ratings I used to do with the late Vivek Debroy, and they used to be state ratings.
And that's why I was very keen to have you, because
you.
I used to wait for your ratings, which you attribute to states. Yes.
Thank you. So, interestingly, after the first 1 or 2 years, there were many occasions where the senior bureaucrats from different states would ask to see me and sit across the table with me. And these were principal secretary level bureaucracy. So they're very senior state level bureaucracy who would ask me, Lavish ji, kya karna chahiye? Or where am I going wrong? Why is my state not doing well? And I would take the ratings, look into the measures and the parameters, and identify that this is the one issue which you could get to more. And I'm glad to say that these two of those states used to come regularly every year. There were substantial improvements in their performance after that. So I think a rating is not just like a Miss India context. It's not about who's first or second. It's about actually finding the issues that one needs to focus on to be able to enhance. So I think that is really important for any rating to do. And that gets me to the third part of my decision, which is the major pillars. When you're looking at responsibility, you have to first look at it yourself internally. You have to look externally, and then you have to look at the common space. So I really loved the framing of this as well. I must say, again, I mean, very nicely set up this whole thing. So then the next question is, of course, when you do frame something, how do you measure it? And now here there is a problem. You ask anyone, and they will give you another set of measures. It's but natural, because our measures come from what we believe is right, wrong, more important, less important, and we are all different. So for the organizers as well, or rather the creators of this index as well, they must have gone through a whole process of doing so. Having said that, and I recognize that these variations agree, I would like to add some things to the conversation. I like my ratings to be elegant. And elegance for me means not necessarily many variables. Elegance for me is you may have fewer variables. So maybe you don't want so many variables, maybe you want fewer. But what is most important is how well do those measures speak with ourselves? Meaning, if we are talking about, let's say, how much do we spend on education? Do we really believe, is that the really core of what our objective is for responsibility? If we do, then yes, it should be. Or do we believe that should we look at carbon emissions? Is that really an important part of our own intentions or our objectives, of how we see responsibility? Then of course it needs to be. So here we need to link the variables with the question of responsibility. And I can later give some of my own preferences. But some things I don't think should be a part of it. And I'd like to focus on, and I'll take a minute.
Please.
Yeah. I don't think GDP should be a part of responsibility. And I feel that because it's an outcome of many different tasks. It's some things are in your control, many things are not in your control. A responsibility index should be devoid of what is the economic outcome. So again, that would be again my submission. But sorry, I stopped you from saying something. So
No, I said that I'm sure if I pursue your trajectory, you will soon want to know how do you compile an index of happiness? Because there is very robust literature, as many of you know, on the happiness index. Societies in general do not necessarily become so aspirational as to change their cultural ethos and embrace something else. They are happier otherwise. Human society aiming at happiness, there is, of course, Lavish, a very robust literature on the index of happiness. What about on life quality? I find Madhuri's here, she has done enormous work on mental health. Do you attach any value to the importance of mental health in a complex society like ours? How does one measure mental health to be a very important factor as interdependence becomes more and more complex. How do we encapsulate that? Would you like to comment a bit on that?
Sure, absolutely, sir. One way to look at all of these areas is that India has a very well thought through process of how is it that progress will be achieved. Let us, for instance, think about Viksit Bharat, right? Now, Viksit Bharat is not just about an economic concept. It's also about education. It's also about health. It's also about equity. It's also about sustainability. And all of those are, in a sense, covered here. It's not that they are not, except that you may find that some aspects for which measures are easily available are better. Some, even though the framers may have wanted to include, but perhaps could not find data. But issues such as mental health, reproductive and child health, gender biases, not just gender biases, some other social biases, etc., are also available. They could be included, they need not. But the one thing that is really important to administer in these, that you need data that are globally comparable. You can't have data which is good for a few countries, but not for others, and therefore include only, let's say, 10 or 15 countries. You would want to, we are limited to a very large extent by the kind of data that is available. Last thing, on issues such as on economic variables, socio-economic variables, sometimes we like to differentiate between how much effort are you putting into it versus objectively, what is the output we are getting out of it, and versus what is the outcome. Now, here we are finding all three of those, and those can be separated out in any context. That is positive.
Thank you very much. I find that the organizers have instructed me that I have to finish at 4:45. So, thank you so much. It's very generous of you. But I would like to make this somewhat interactive and really invite two questions, if there are. Otherwise, I'm going to provoke one or two people who are here to make some comment. Of course, Mr. Singh is here, who has worked in the WTO for an enormously long time. There was some discussion on the WTO. Would you like to make any comment on that? I'm referring to you, please. Mike, please. Yes, please.
Thank you. So Chinese practices were raised. First of all, WTO is not like IMF and World Bank in the sense the organization is a collective membership of nations, and the nations which are members run it. So it's
Who coined this idea, which is genius? Nothing is agreed till everything is agreed.
this
WTO.
No, that's because when you are negotiating and there are multiple topics in which you are negotiating, there are interlinkages. And that's what that idea reflects, that until you have tied all the knots, the fabric is not really there for you to work upon. So basically, the Chinese actions were taken up. I'll give you an example. Export subsidies of China. So China agreed that it was giving export subsidies to industrial goods and promised it would not actually continue to do so. We had done some research going to China, and we found that under the radar, China continued to go on with that policy. So the Chinese system is very different. You don't have the information. They implement policies in such a way that you will not be able to assess. And China really gamed the system. So the system today is not, cannot be constructed in such a way that that gaming can stop. In fact, the US has sent a communication to the WTO on WTO reform, in which it says one of the things which cannot be addressed is this gaming of the system by a non-market economy. So that's a basic weakness, and something needs to be thought of how to control it. Otherwise, people have to have some kind of criteria or thresholds that if something happens beyond it, then you will be treated differently. So those are some of the ideas which are floating. But as far as WTO is concerned, today the problem is arising not only due to China. In fact, China is the good boy today. It's another major nation which has torn WTO system to shreds. So let's see what happens over time, whether the rest of the countries will come together or not. But you need a system which gives predictability and stability so that you can plan. And that is something which is for the future.
Thank you. That was a comment specifically on the WTO. But if we look at the institutions of the multilateral world, of which the fountainhead is the United Nations. Ambassador Konarty, you have worked in the UN system for an enormously long time. Do you think that we are more or less, it's a requiem of the UN system? And if that is so, do you see any orderly system emerge? And what can be done? Because India is a believer in the power of multilateralism. Do you think that multilateralism is over? I'll ask this question to some of my other panelists. Would you like to make a comment, Ambassador Konarty? Oh, you didn't hear the question. That's all right then. Okay. Prachi, you have also worked in multilateral organizations for a very long time, as indeed all of us. Would you say multilateralism, since you worked with the International Monetary Fund for a very long time and have experience, do you believe that this is a moment when responsible conduct would mean a degree of obligation to a faith in multilateralism than transactional mercantilism?
So thank you very much. This is an excellent question and relates to what Mr. Harshvardhan Singh talked about, and Neelkanth talked about. China and the US are the two big elephants. But it's interesting, that the treatment of China and the United States by the International Monetary Fund has been very different. Because China, as Mr. Harshvardhan Singh pointed out, it's been called out by the WTO. It's been called out by the IMF in all the reports. And in fact, if you look at the articles of agreement of the IMF, there are specific clauses about exchange rate manipulation. Interestingly, the treatment for the United States is very different. So one is explicit exchange rate manipulation, which everyone knows, China has done for a long time and it's probably gamed the system, because China was actually never borrowing from the IMF. So, there were no conditionalities, explicit conditionalities. But think about the United States. When in my opening remarks, I talked about quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is nothing but, during the global financial crisis, the central bank goes and, big time and buys these assets. So that, if your interest rates are near zero, you have another method of reducing interest rates. But think about it, those of you who have, training in macroeconomics, the moment you introduce interest rates, basically that means your exchange rate depreciates. So what the United States did through quantitative easing was nothing different from explicit exchange rate manipulation by China. but the United States has never been called out by the International Monetary Fund.
So, thank you, Prachi. I wanted to hear this, what you said, that two sets of rules apply. One set, the reserve of some countries which led, and therefore the acquisition that these post-World War international institutions have been created where the nations responsible for creating this is outside the index of their responsibility or responsible behavior. The different set of rules apply to different countries. And therefore, this is in that sense, the effort of the organizers to have a responsible nations index has a raison d'etre which transcends this. Nilkant, any comment on that?
Yes, and I think the creation of the index, because see what happens is very often, as Lavish was saying, that having disparate views, or at least say even aligned views held by disparate people who may or may not be communicating with each other, it does not help solve the problem. I think it becomes very important. So now that we all know, like, if you remember at the Kautilya Economic Conclave, when people were discussing whether, Asian nations should be forming a trade cartel or whatever, a trade pact, and the Europeans were saying, oh, why don't you include us in them? So it's very clear that the era of, so at 1945, when the US was 56% of world GDP, they could establish a rules-based order which was revolved around them. Today, that rules-based order doesn't work because they don't think they can compete with China using those rules. So now the rules are being freely violated. Even in 1971 and 1985, when they deliberately devalued their currency, the cancellation of Bretton Woods in 71, Plaza Accord in 85, it was very clear that, might is right, we will do what we want. And they had helped rebuild Germany and Japan. It was their currencies which were appreciating against the dollar, so they could get away with it. This time it won't work. And so if an alternative has to be created, it becomes important to have an anchor around which basically these two, everyone excluding these two, can come together. And I think this index is a great initiative.
So 1 minute comment by you, Lavish.
Oh,
Yes.
just a general comment. I think this is a very good start. It needs to be continued. I feel that to the organizers and the publishers, I would say, since you are using data which is available historically, it is much more interesting to see how an index moves across time. So you may want to do 1 or 10 years back, what would the values have been? It makes it far more interesting. That's it.
Thank you. There's somebody.
We all are happy, but what I wanted to understand from all you distinguished people is, now multilateral treaties and bilateral treaties. India is mainly into bilateral treaties which are giving us benefits also, like free trade agreements which we are doing. Now when we talk about multilateral treaties, we have seen treaties or sort of treaties like OBOR of China, which is nothing but a tool used by China to exploit smaller nations and just to show its dominance. So I wanted something on that, if you could please speak. Is it being responsible by China the way they are doing that OBOR, BRI? That's what I wanted to know.
Perhaps the answer is so apparent in your question, but nonetheless, Prachi would like to 30 seconds. And 30 seconds closing comment. We are up to the staff.
I don't think I have an explicit, answer to the question. I think this is, as my fellow panelists have said, this is an excellent initiative. I think it's for us, it's most important to make this index credible and robust, and to continue doing it, constructing the index over time. So I think for credibility and robustness, I think expanding the set of indicators, I beg to differ from my panelist, Lavish. I think it's, to be objective rather than subjective, including a larger set of indicators, I think is perhaps more prudent. Otherwise, you could be subject to questions about that you've been cherry picking. So my preference would be to have a large set of indicators, definitely include economic performance, because economic performance is key ingredient of responsibility, internal responsibility for sure, and even global responsibility. And finally, I think I would just say that, again, to make the methodology more robust, to increase its credibility. So currently the index is very top down.
Okay.
I think if we could do a bottoms up version, I think that would be addition as well.
1 minute comment, Neelkant.
Yeah, so to answer, I think it's about not very different from should debt be given. See, the difference between OBOR and say financial repression and dumping of $1.2 trillion of extra stuff on the world is that the countries taking that debt have willingly done so. So I don't think that is irresponsible behavior. I mean, the fact that they're dangling carrots, so that becomes subjective. So, if someone has over-indebted themselves, is it the problem of the borrower or the lender? But how they act with that, and I think, like what happened in Argentina, should they get first preference but all of those are too technical. But I think from an index perspective, I think I totally, agree with what Lavish said. Some kind of time series, so we see if countries are becoming less or more responsible over time. Going back in history, I think will give a very fresh perspective. Otherwise, it's an excellent initiative.
Well, thank you very much. I've struck the clock, and so I will take 1 minute to sum up this discussion. The first conclusion appears to be that there is an overwhelming consensus among us that having an index of responsible nations index is a very credible and a laudable initiative, and that this is going to fill a large vacuum in the understanding of the conduct. Second very broad conclusion is that over a long period of time, the ranking of this is certainly going to point out the ways in which this level of responsibilities can be enhanced, and the quality of data with more variables or less is a debatable issue, but with certainly variables we do not overlook the economic issues are really become more and more robust to compare behavior over a period of time. The third, and that's the conclusion that I reach, an old saying, that saying is, that which is measured is done. That which is measured can be managed. That which is measured has the power of nudging behavioral changes. The raison d'être of this is to inject behavioral changes and to nudge nations into responsible behavior norms. That itself, I think, would be an important contribution to make in the contribution of shaping both domestic policies and international policies, and for enabling India to achieve three very important objectives which are linked with this. One is looking at the uncertainties which lie ahead. We can now see the raison d'être to Atmanirbhar Bharat. We can see the raison d'être of what is known as Swadeshi, because we can only depend on one set of people. We have to depend on ourselves and not depend on others. That the current uncertainty leads us and reinforces the power of Atmanirbhar and the power of Swadeshi, and responsible nation behavior and an index would be India's contribution to the literature of nudging nations for working for a better India and a better world. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
I'm extremely grateful for this panel to have threadbare discussed our endeavors. Thank you all so much for this. Extremely grateful. Your thoughts have given us thoughts which will make us improve this index which we have developed over the last 3 years. We worked hard on it. Again, this is secondary data and not primary data. Just to escape being branded as bias. B, we shall make it a yearly endeavor so that all the criticisms which are there, this is work in progress. We shall improve with all your suggestions. We have tried to have as many indices, as many areas as possible so that the responsibility does not come out in terms of only limited aspects, but much broader aspects. For a lot of things we would have loved to include in this, but the data was not available. So thank you all. Can I request this audience to give a standing ovation to this very distinguished panel? Thank you so much. Thank you. Grateful. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very, very distinguished sir. We have amongst us a very rare breed of an intellectual who has been an administrator. He's been a minister in France for higher education, and he's been an economist. Never mind. May I welcome Professor Edward Hussain. He's come specially from Paris to attend this. Thank you so much. I would request him to give his address here. Here, Professor.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to participate in the launch of an index that is set to play an important role in the coming years. The 20th century was obsessed with quantitative measures, economic output figures, and value added for its own sake. For a generation now, many voices around the world have been calling for new criteria for comparing nations. But instead of listening to these voices, those I would call the fundamentalist thinkers of quantitative measures have become more radical. The financial performance of states and companies has become the ultimate criterion. So, for this reason, we must thank the World Intellectual Forum for taking action and putting its influence and wisdom at the service of an index that measures the responsibility of nations. As a Frenchman, as a European, how can I thank you enough? I come from a country, a continent, where political gloom reigns currently in the face of an apparent lack of alternatives and some anxiety of being excluded from the march of history. However, the Index on the Responsibility of Nations teaches us the opposite. I calculated the average of the European Union countries ranked, and it puts the EU on a par with your country, India, around place 16, which is per se extremely interesting. We Europeans, therefore, have every reason to regain pride in a model that appears to be balanced between three main criteria: domestic responsibility, environmental responsibility, and external responsibility. Let us add a very important lesson from the Responsible Nations Index. In Europe, if you look at the figures, these are the small nations that achieve the best results and pull the whole upwards. Intuitively, this is quite easy to understand. Large countries tend to confuse sovereignty with power. However, sovereignty is primarily a question of jurisdiction. It is a question of who lays down the law within certain borders. It is therefore eminently a question of responsibility. In a previous discussion, I quoted General de Gaulle, former French president, who, in my view, revealed the ultimate meaning of responsibility for a sovereign nation. He said, "There's nothing like independence if there is no international sovereignty." It means a nation is accountable in front of others, and it must bear its own responsibility. The world of the 21st century will only be able to function if we can find the right balance, and the sense of responsibility is the bridge that connects the legitimate aspiration for independence with the necessary cooperation between nations. Let me identify 3 effects of the Responsible Nations Index. First, it brings together data from different fields that are normally treated separately, hence the surprise effect. As I said, the first nations in the index, the best ranked nations, are small nations. Secondly, it's not enough to be a champion in one category to be considered as a very or highly responsible nation. You have to perform in many categories. It has an equalizing effect. This is the second effect. But following the ranking, you start looking at the world as a community of nations. Major powers do not rank best. It was mentioned that the US or China do not rank best in this index. They are around rank 67, 69. So you may have Western countries performing high and others rather poorly, and the same for other groups of nations like the BRICS. I'm sure that the Responsible Nation Index will contribute to the overcoming of many ideological barriers. It has a unifying effect. So a surprise effect, an equalizing effect, and a unifying effect. The surprise effect should lead to a vivid discussion among scholars and experts. I'm glad I was able to exchange already in depth with the team of the World Intellectual Foundation and some of the conceptors of the index. Just before this official launching ceremony and the panel discussion, we had a very important discussion also among experts, and I remember I will mention a few aspects. First, all agree to say this is a cross-cutting index. It is very important to bring all these figures together. Secondly, there is a real question when you try to combine an evaluation assessment index and ethics. There are certain things you cannot measure, or how do you measure them? That's a real challenge. But on the other side, measuring many aspects and, for instance, environmental responsibility, it means bringing everything to a kind of universal language. An index is a way to have a shared universal language. And the last aspect we saw in our discussion was the challenge of not having a top-down index, but something which would be really bottom-up. I'm sure that the discussion we have here is the first of a very long series. The Responsible Nations Index will provoke reactions, both positive and negative. It will feed off the debate. Its criteria will be refined with time. New evaluation categories will be introduced over the years. But one thing is certain, it will become a central reference point in public discourse. I'm also sure that it will inspire others to follow suit. Finally, allow me to talk about an array of rankings, of indexes, which with which I am very familiar, universities. In 2003, the first Shanghai ranking was published, which has since become a benchmark. However, its flaw is that it only takes into account the scientific output of universities. Then you had other indexes created to complement this in the Anglo-American world that take into account the employability of graduates from each university. But I have always felt that this falls short of the mark. The methodology used by the World Intellectual Forum for the Responsible Nations Index should be a source of inspiration. Imagine if we published an index of responsible universities, which, in addition to what student rankings already do, included an assessment of teaching performance, financial accessibility to campuses, the number of scholarship students, the ratio of female graduates, the quality of life on campuses, and their level on environmental performance. I think this gives us a few insights in what could be done. So it means that what has been implemented with the Responsible Nations Index can be a model. And let us have a dream. Let us dream of having not only a Responsible Nations Index published every year, but having a Responsible Nations Forum, gathering nations discussing with each other on responsibility and the shaping of a multipolar world. I thank you very much.
We give a loud applause to Professor. As I said, he is the rare distinction of having headed the most important department of government of France, and also being a vice chancellor, being an academic luminary, I would say. And his contribution to this index shall always be available to us. So I'm extremely grateful, and as I told you, he took the trouble of coming specially for this program. We are really grateful to you, sir. Thank you so much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, हम लोग इंतजार कर रहे थे हिंदुस्तान के पूर्व राष्ट्रपति जी का, रामनाथ कोविंद जी का। वो पधार चुके हैं, वो बाहर हैं, आ रहे हैं। आज हमारे लिए एक बहुत बड़ा दिन है। Having him unveil this index gives us the credibility this index has of being a global. Yeah, there he comes. You can all see that. Let's give him a big hand. मेरा सबसे निवेदन है कि सब खड़े हो जाएं। अब राष्ट्रीय गान इसके बाद होगा। कृपया राष्ट्रीय गान के लिए सब लोग खड़े हो जाएं।
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता, पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंगा, विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा, तव शुभ नामे जागे, तव शुभ आशीष मांगे, गाहे तव जय गाथा, जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता, जय हे जय हे जय हे जय
भारत माता की, भारत माता की, भारत माता की। आदरणीय पूर्व राष्ट्रपति जी, आदरणीय पूर्व राष्ट्रपति जी, हम बहुत अनुग्रहित हैं कि आज आप यहाँ पे आके एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण कार्यक्रम जो हो रहा है उसमें हमें आपका सानिध्य मिल रहा है और आपके आशीर्वचन जो हैं इस ग्लोबल इंडेक्स को, जिसको कि हम सोचते हैं कि ये विश्व भर के लिए एक बहुत गंभीर सोच का कारण बनेगा, आपने आके इसे हम सबके लिए प्रोत्साहित करा, उसके लिए हम आपके बहुत बहुत आभारी हैं। मैं वर्ल्ड इंटेलेक्चुअल फाउंडेशन की ओर से मैं हमारी डायरेक्टर और हमारी प्रोजेक्ट डायरेक्टर दोनों से निवेदन करूंगा कि कोविंद जी का वर्ल्ड इंटेलेक्चुअल फाउंडेशन की तरफ से स्वागत करें। हिमांगी जी। मैं मंच पे विराजमान जो मंच पे विराजमान विभूतियां हैं उनसे आपका परिचय करवा दूं। मेरे सामने मनोज तिवारी जी हैं जो कि आईआईटी मुंबई के डायरेक्टर हैं। जो आईआईएम मुंबई, सॉरी, देखिए आईआईटी जो है, आईआईटी और आईआईएम का जो कंफ्यूजन है उसके लिए मैं आपसे माफी मांगता हूं। वर्ल्ड में मैनेजमेंट के दृष्टि से जो एक इंस्टीट्यूशन ने अपना नाम कमाया है वो आईआईएम मुंबई है और उसके डायरेक्टर के रूप में आपने आने का स्वीकृति दी, उसके लिए हम आपके बहुत आभारी हैं। जस्टिस हमारे बीच, हमारे एडवाइजरी बोर्ड के जो चेयरमैन हैं जस्टिस अरुण मिश्रा जी, वो किसी परिचय के मोहताज नहीं है, वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट के जज रहे हैं और उसके साथ साथ नेशनल ह्यूमन राइट्स कमीशन के चेयरमैन रहे हैं और उनका सानिध्य हमें मिला है। इस सारे इंडेक्स को डेवलप करने में उनकी जो भूमिका है वो सराहनीय है, हम सब उसके बहुत आभारी हैं। राष्ट्रपति जी के दाएं हाथ में हमारे ट्रस्ट के जो चेयरमैन हैं श्री जगदीश मुखी जी, वो हैं, ये भूतपूर्व गवर्नर हैं, ये दिल्ली के भूतपूर्व फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर भी रह चुके हैं और इनका जो अनुभव है इस सारे क्षेत्र में वो अद्वितीय है। मैं एक आप सबके शायद जहन में नहीं होगा, 67 में जब ये श्री राम कॉलेज ऑफ कॉमर्स से पास आउट करा एमकॉम का, उसके बाद यूपीएससी में बैठे एंड ही क्रैक द यूपीएससी, बट इनको कहा देश सेवा ज्यादा महत्वपूर्ण है, इन्होंने यूपीएससी छोड़ा और उसके बाद ये देश सेवा में लग गए। ऐसी विभूति हमारे बीच में है। उसके साथ शांति श्री जी बैठी हैं जो कि जेएनयू की वाइस चांसलर हैं। I have a tongue-in-cheek remark. Not only have you improved the academic environment of JNU, you have changed the character of JNU also. We are extremely grateful for that. I will become nationalist. And I already introduced you to Professor Eduardo. And with this, can I request for a short film on what we have done? This is about the Responsible Nation Index.
For decades, we measured greatness by scale. GDP, military reach, technological dominance. But power without responsibility produces a predictable outcome. Displaced populations, degraded ecosystem, governance that concentrates authority without accountability. The costs are no longer abstract, they are systemic. The defining insight, legitimacy no longer flows from dominance. It derives from how power is used, domestically, internationally, ecologically. This is the transition from power to responsibility, presenting the new measure of global power, responsibility, a new standard of leadership. Beyond power, the responsibility imperative. The Responsible Nations Index reframes the global question, not how powerful a nation is, but how responsibly it governs. 3 pillars, 1 framework. Internal responsibility, the social contract fulfilled. Does the state provide security, justice, healthcare, education, the foundations of dignified life? Environmental responsibility, planetary stewardship. Does the nation protect the global commons or externalize costs onto future generations? External responsibility, global citizenship. Does the nation contribute to collective security, support those in need, engage cooperatively? 7 dimensions, 15 aspects, 58 indicators, sourced from global data sets, validated through rigorous academic collaboration. Our findings: high concentration of scores above the global median, particularly in governance quality, social protection systems, and institutional accountability. Here's a catch. Regional advantage does not really translate into uniform responsibility. Very high responsibility scores, but divergent development models and governance approaches within the same region. Several economies perform above expectations in social inclusion and international economic engagement, but governance and environment outcomes vary sharply, often ignored, but demonstratively high performances across responsibility indicators, especially across environment protection peace contributions. Responsibility outcomes heavily influenced by government quality, conflict exposure, and environmental management practices, not just the income level alone. India's first homegrown global index flips the global rules of leadership, gives a new axis of power for the world. Grounded in the ancient Indian principle, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. Shifting the paradigm from power to stewardship, from dominance to dignity, from national interest to global well-being. 3 years in the making. Rigorous global methodology, academic collaboration between World Intellectual Foundation and Jawaharlal Nehru University, parallel validation by IIM Mumbai, a moral architecture for the incendiary 21st century, India's ancient principle, scripting the future forward narrative for the globe. An initiative by World Intellectual Foundation.
मैं अब जेएनयू की वाइस चांसलर शांति श्री जी से निवेदन करूंगा कि वो she should address this gathering and ma'am this side.
सबको मेरा नमस्कार. Good afternoon to all of you. Most respected President, former President of India, Sri Ram Nath Kovind. I have a personal, gratitude to him because he should take the credit for making me the Vice Chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru. And let me tell you, it was not an easy choice, he knows, because I became the first woman Vice Chancellor. All the leftists didn't bring any woman Vice Chancellor. And the first woman from the backward classes and from the state of Tamil Nadu. So he had to break 3 glass ceilings. He will tell you later how difficult it was. And I thank you, sir, once again. Chairman of the World Intellectual Forum, Sri Jagdish Mukherjee, Justice Arun Mishra, renowned economist and former MP, Sri N.K. Singh, member of the Finance Commission, Professor Manoj Tiwari, and Professor Edward. And ladies and gentlemen and eminent guests here. Let me at the outset tell you that this has been an effort done by the World Intellectual Forum when they approached Jawaharlal Nehru University. Jawaharlal Nehru University has proved that we are the best in narrative architecture. And we have proved that we are serving Vikasit Bharat and multiple narratives and nationalist narratives. And this was an opportunity for us to work with the World Intellectual Forum. It began 3 years back when they brought in the intellectual question, fundamental intellectual question, can responsibility, so often spoken in philosophical terms, be meaningfully conceptualized, structured, and measured at the level of nation states? We also wanted to prove that narrative building is not just from the West. Even India can do it. And for Vikasit Bharat, it is very important that countries like India, a civilization state, dictates narratives for global responsibility. And as most of you know, this question becomes all the more important today, especially when might is right. So I would say that I congratulate especially the people who have begun this work, Dr. Rubina Mittal, Dr. Hemangi Sinha from the World Intellectual Forum, and the Jawaharlal Nehru University team of Professor Rajiv Dasgupta, Professor Yerumalai, and Professor Suchi Yadav, and many of the other faculties who joined with them. So I am happy that Jawaharlal Nehru University is being known for more responsible work rather than just the fringe elements. So they came to us, had discussions with us 3 years back, and we took up this challenge. So here you have a World Intellectual Forum, which is a think tank, and India's primest university, funded totally by the Union Government of India, helping in the narrative building. We have proved that we can even do it this side. And let me congratulate all the schools, all the centers that have worked with it. What were the issues that they had to? They had to construct every step required clarity and adjudication as well as debates centered around the indicators. 3 pillars, 7 dimensions, 15 aspects, and 58 indicators. And as most of you know, these indicators are not very easy because it had to be agreed, compared with international indices like the Human Development Index, the United Nations Development Program, and other indices that Edward told you, which the European Union has been using. So equally important was to resolve these indicators sourced exclusively from globally reputed, universally recognized institutions as the United Nations System, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, and other authoritative international databases. I congratulate this team for this excellent hard work that it did. In the third phase, it had to be validated. So we went to the Indian Institute of Management, Mumbai, who was, because as all of you know, Delhi is the political capital, Mumbai is the economic capital. Power and money go together. So we decided to go to Indian Institute of Mumbai, who validated and who also worked very closely with us. Simultaneously through these 3 years, the endeavor remained globally engaged. Scholars and policy makers and academics from different regions were consulted to test the relevance, universality, and the interpretive strength of the framework. I would finally go to what are the outcomes, observations, and insights of this. First, if you see, responsibility does not correlate mechanically with wealth, power, or income levels. So maybe we wanted to break with the Western model of the power or realistic model, but at the same time, a responsibility of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the world is a family and every nation has not only internal responsibilities, but external responsibilities. And this is also part of our civilizational outlook, that there has to be a balance between not only physical, material, as well as intellectual and cosmic force. I think we are the only civilization that talks about science and spirituality. So I think that spiritual dimension we are bringing in with responsibility. Also, responsible nation and index brings to light the uneven distribution of responsibility across domains. A nation may perform well internally through social welfare, education, and governance, while simultaneously exhibiting lower responsibility externally, whether in conflict behavior, emissions, or global cooperation. This reinforces the core insight: responsibility is a multidimensional and cannot be reduced to a single narrative of success or failure. So we are saying it's multidimensional. And finally, we say that policy choices matter more than capacity alone. And it is here that we were brought in this idea. And I think it is very important that these diagnostic signals that these 3 institutions, especially the World Intellectual Forum and Jawaharlal Nehru University with the Indian Institute of Management, Mumbai, we have been able to do. And I think it is very important that in this century, when we are having a world of uncertainties, legitimacy flows not merely from power, but from responsibility, not from dominance, but from conduct, not from capability alone, but from accountability to humanity and the planet. And if you see here, I think we all had this idea that India has a great responsibility for a global order and the future global order, where because we are strong, but we are not hegemonic. So that is a huge difference. And there is a difference between deterrence and domination. And I think India has always been, this requires investment, strategic patience, and clarity, as well as if you see very clearly that the liberal order did not collapse because it was attacked. It collapsed because it was selectively applied. So India is saying that this selective application of rules and rule-based order will not work anymore in the future. What it replaces is not to be a greater, but more gentler, more clearer, that the age of pretense is over. The world has entered into a phase where power speaks plainly and institutions struggle to keep up. In such a moment, the task for states, especially like India, is neither to moralize not to retreat, but to adapt without without losing themselves. Strength must be real, restraint must be intentional, principles must be lived, not preached. So India believes in the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and we also believe in the, I would end with the saying from Gita, we believe in this whole project on Karmanye Vadikarasya Mahapaleshu Kadach. We believe every country, if it does its duty of responsibility at all the three pillars, the world would be a much better place to live in. Thank you. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Thank you, Shanti Shiji. As I said, it took us 3 years. And this work continued because she was most indulgent. So often we would trouble her and say, things are not moving. And then she would just move the strings and, everything would get going. And it is this reason why we are standing today, having done a lot of hard work in evolving this index. Before I invite Manojji, who's the director of Indian Institute of Management, Mumbai, I'm not making a mistake, sir, again. Right. I would like to thank Mr. P.K. Gupta, who's the Chancellor. Sir, can you stand? He's the Chancellor of Sharda University. And Sharda University has really contributed so substantially in every kind of resource. We've had interns from Sharda University. We've had professors who have again had extensive discussions in evolving this index. As already stated, it is a unique index. An index which globally has not been thought about. People have evaluated nations on different paradigms, but this is a new paradigm. And in today's context, it's all the more relevant. May I now request Professor Manoj to come and address us. His institution has really done a massive audit of what we were doing. They left nothing unturned to ensure that there is credibility and there is perfection in evolving this Responsible Nation Index. Dr.
Thank you, sir. At the outset, I extend my deep respect and gratitude to the World Foundation, World Intellectual Foundation for giving us this opportunity to be here. I pay my deep respect to our former President of India, Sri Ramnath Kovindji, and Sri Jagdish Mukherjee, Chairman, World Intellectual Foundation, and former Governor of Assam, Justice Arun Misraji, Chairman and Advisory Board of World Intellectual Foundation, so Santi Sri Pandit, Madam Vice Chancellor, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Sri N.K. Singh, who was chair earlier in the session, and Dr. Ravina Mittal, Dr. Himangi Sinha, Professor Rajiv Das Gupta, and Professor Lumalai, and Professor Sushi Yadav, and Professor Edward. With this, it was very mammoth task actually to come out of with such an index which will capture both the three parameters which are primarily responsible for building up this index actually. And here we have taken almost all the measures which have been discussed to describe as a good economy, also very, very socially relevant, and looking into account many other factors which are responsible to develop such kind of index. So it's a timely and meaningful work that integrates responsibility, sustainability, and governance to assist how nations act towards their citizens, global community, and environment. And appreciation of the World Intellectual Forum Foundation for advancing this important global initiative cannot be described in words. This needs to be mentioned in a very historically context. That first time a real index is coming up that describes that how actually, though you may be powerful, you may be very humble, but you may be very economically sound, but are you still responsible? So this kind of question can properly be answered by this index. So here what we did, we have validation ensures conceptual clarity, methodological robustness, which was mentioned by Dr. N.K. Singh, reliability of the results and policy relevance, supporting both evidence-based policy making and informed public discourse. Actually, we also took into account that how the validation process works actually. So here, independent and rigorous validation process we did, and also the focus was on conceptual alignment, and we covered both indicators, that is normalization and aggregation. These two are popular techniques that used for having many kind of multidimensional data, and they need to be aggregated through proper normalization process that we have been done. And steps were taken actually to enhance transparency, robustness, and credibility of the index actually. The responsible lesson index is built on actual reported quantitative data. So there are two kind of data actually, one which is called totally quantitative data and one is qualitative data. So in qualitative data, there are chances of giving more weightage or less weightage is there. So here we have given equal weight to all the parameters. So appropriateness of the analytical approach, there are many good methods given in the decision-making theory. One among them is multi-attribute utility theorem, multi-criteria decision-making, analytical hierarchy processing, top sys. Many methods are there. But here we have totally relied on that how the normalization and other validation process can be used actually. So this as a foundational framework that can be baseline actually, and many other structured data integration process and analytical approaches can be aligned later on actually. So we can say that this evolution of consistently global best practices and the Human Development Index used by the United Nations, Global Innovation Index by the World Intellectual Property Organization. So it is in that line, but it covers more structured parameters in its purview than others actually. So results reflect an interaction between the conceptual framework, country-specific conditions, and carefully balanced and contextual interpretation. So what I would like to say, there are many things which we cannot describe in a language of mathematics. Say, if you want to describe some very responsible behavior, as you can say that our nature. Indian, if you see, I quote Ramcharitmanas, where very clearly mentioned about Lord Ram that he Ram Janam Jagamangal Hetu. Means this was not related to only one country. Many times you can see, at least I have noted 100 places where Jag was mentioned, not only one nation, one place. Well, Jag means entire world. Many times they talk about all the trilok. So idea is that we are always trying to see that the lens of angle to visualize from a particular place where we see the world as a responsible place for living together, all kind of creation, not only human being, but also other living beings. So with this, I can say we are so thankful for this forum that they have engaged us, particularly Hemangi ma'am and Madam Mittal, that they have come to us, and accordingly, we have been engaged with this. Thank you, and all the dignitaries sitting outside dais also. Most of them I know, and they have been motivating force for us to join this program. Once again, thank you, forum, for inviting us, and hope that this index will be a landmark in the history of different indexes to cover the historical aspects, showing that how India is well-behaved country in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manojji. And I must say, we were greatly encouraged when Indian Institute of Management Mumbai decided to be a part of it. See, it's very critical that any index must have credibility. And when institutions like Jawaharlal Nehru University and Indian Institute of Management Mumbai are a part of the entire exercise of ranking nations, see here it's not just some data, it's ranking. So this ranking, to be relevant and to be credible, institutional support is critical. And that too from institutions which globally are acclaimed for their excellence. So for this reason, I am extremely thankful that The two institutions, you have lent credibility to this entire exercise, which has been going on for 3 years. And I'm sure this index is going to be a landmark index globally. It's going to be a new paradigm, as I said earlier. May I now request Justice Arun Mishra ji, who's been the chairman of the advisory board of World Intellectual Foundation, and who's guided us, who's sat through all this, who's really undertaken the vigor of evaluating it, looking at it critically, and then refining it. We've troubled him so often, and he's ever been there for us with his smiling face. Really thankful to you, sir, and I would request you to please address us.
Honorable Shri Ramnath Kovind ji, former President of India, Shri Jagdish Mukhi, former Governor, Shri Tiwari ji, Director of IIM, Ms. Pandit, Vice Chancellor, JNU, other esteemed experts on the dais, off the dais, scholars, diplomats, foreign policy makers, ladies and gentlemen, member of media. Firstly, we are all overwhelmed by the very presence of Honorable Shri Ramnath Kovind ji, who is a dignity personified, to launch this RNI. It is a proud privilege and responsibility for me to address this distinguished gathering. I strongly believe that institutions endure not merely because of authority, but because of ideas they profess. World Intellectual Foundation is a forum committed to intellectual rigor, evidence-based inquiry, and principled public discourse. It has produced several reports on policy and governance matters. On this August occasion, I remember Shri Narendra Kumar ji, who was the founder of this forum. He was chairperson of Delhi Public School and head of Har Anand Prakashan. Today, the world, as discussed, is facing new and complex challenges. Technology is the power of the day. We have cyberspace and its use and problems. Artificial intelligence, cross-border crimes, global warming, rising of greenhouse gases, deforestation. We have the transboundary dumping of the waste in the developing countries by the rich countries. We have the plastic garbage of the size of France in the Pacific Ocean and other patches in the Atlantic and Indian Ocean. There is urgent need for joint action, as we are the custodians of the earth, to keep it safe for future generations. In view of the open markets, as already discussed, there is unfair trade practices. There is need of fair trade policies. It has become essential to protect the national interest of national economy. It has also become necessary to prevent the exploitation. It has also become necessary to protect the interests of the farmers, to protect them from the subsidized products of the wealthy countries. They cannot match with that. There is widening inequality and unrest due to deprivation of the fruits of globalization. The colonial dynamics are unfolding and expanding at present. There are other major challenges: drug trafficking, terrorism, ongoing unending war, genocide, human rights violation, gender justice. They cannot be solved without cooperation of all the nations together. World has become a village. Happening of one country affects the other nation and individual. There is a global distrust in the global governance system. International cooperation becomes necessary to deal with the unprecedented situation and prevailing uncertainties. Nations' powers has grown, but responsibility has not kept the pace. Time requires responsible conduct of the nations. Hence, we present this Responsible Nations Index in collaboration with JNU and ratified by IIM Mumbai. They are institutions of excellence. Index is based on statistical precision, secondary empirical data of the World Bank, United Nations, UNDP, IMF, FAO, and World Justice Report. It provides database mirror and is to restore the accountability. RNI is providing constructive utilization of the power, wealth, and GDP towards its citizens, other nations, and the planet Earth, which is the parameter of the responsible nation. Major advanced economies are showing a strong performance on internal responsibilities, but weaker on the side of environmental and external responsibility. India is ranked in the RNI within top 20 countries. India is regaining its position. India is ranked higher in the key areas which are historically our strength. And based on our ethos and philosophy, our motto in Rigved is Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina. As such, we rank higher on social protection coverage, the security for food, Samani Prapa Sahavo Anna Bhaga, water and food, everybody has equal right, is recognized in the Tharveda. Our contribution to the concept of obligatory distributive justice in Constitution of India to help the poor and to make him a part of the mainstream, as well as has worked well on for our placement in the providing access to the basic amenities, healthcare outreach, immunization, maternal health improvement. We ardently follow the Rigved principle, Sankachadhvam Samvaddhvam. Let us walk together, let us think together, let our minds be the same. That is why we are a successful democracy and with electoral continuity. We respect women like Durga. As such, we are on the path of women empowerment, as indicated in the index. We rank ahead in the areas of external responsibility, such as peace, based on our principle Ahimsa, based on peace by Buddha, and followed at present in more than 50 countries. Our ancient philosophy is Vasudev Kutumbakam. The entire world is one family. Even United Nations in 2022 and UNDP report has recognized our contribution as to peace as well as environmental aspects. And they have ranked higher us in that. We are committed to the peaceful coexistence. Our strategic strength is evidenced by the Operation Sindoor and no first use of atomic weapon. Our global trade and economic cooperation is without predatory practices. Foreign policy based on global solidarity. India is historically renowned in the fields of science, technology, numerology, and education. We had Nalanda and Takshashila, where 10,000 of students used to read at one time. 5th century Sushruta is revered as father of surgery. On the environmental front, India benefits from lower capita emissions, and then we have increasing share of renewable energy consumption. We protect biodiversity, and we are towards the preservation of the forest cover. Our ancient scriptures like Atharvaveda and Vishnu Puran talk of protection flora and fauna and to keep the water bodies, rivers, ponds and wells clean. The Tulsi, people and Bargat trees which produce oxygen in abundance are not cut but rather they are treated as sacred. You have the culture of Tapovan, Abhyaran and Shrivan which were used to be protected forests. We have witnessed Chipko movement saving the trees in recent past. India is the fourth largest economy. However, it ranks above the other two leading economies in considering the aforesaid aspects. India distributed COVID vaccines to a large number of countries. On the other hand, the patents of the vaccines, drugs, and medicines which are life-saving were protected at the cost of right to life. Rights and duties go together as well as power and responsibility. It is piously hoped that index prompts the nations to introspect, to make institutional reforms. The index redefines the means to be a responsible nation. It speaks to promote the world where nations are esteemed and evaluated based on their contribution to the citizens' global peace, prosperity, and the sustainability of planet Earth and the cosmic balance. RNI is not for criticism. It is in the spirit of Loko Samasta Sukhno Bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and in peace. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justice Mishra, for being the leading light of wisdom for all of us. We're extremely grateful. And ladies and gentlemen, now the moment has come for the release of the Responsible Nation Index. And I would request the Honorable former President Ramnath Kovindji, along with everybody, to release this index, which is going to be a landmark index in the global history of evaluation of nations. May I now request Honorable former President Saab to address this very august gathering of experts, academia, intellectual giants, I would call some of them who are present here, and a very, very enlightened audience who have looked at this index with a lot of curiosity, with a lot of anxiety, and it has now been released. I will request you all to take a copy of this, which will be available outside. And this has very interesting parts, but मैं कोविंद जी से निवेदन करूंगा कि वो हम सबको संबोधित करें.
रिस्पॉन्सिबल नेशंस इंडेक्स के शुभारंभ के पावन अवसर पर असम के पूर्व राज्यपाल और वर्ल्ड इंटेलेक्चुअल फाउंडेशन के चेयरमैन प्रोफेसर जगदीश मुखी जी, राष्ट्रीय मानवाधिकार आयोग के पूर्व अध्यक्ष न्यायमूर्ति श्री अरुण कुमार मिश्रा जी, जेएनयू की कुलपति प्रोफेसर शांति श्री डी पंडित जी, पेरिस विश्वविद्यालय के पूर्व कुलपति प्रोफेसर एडोर्ड हसन जी, IIM मुंबई के निदेशक प्रोफेसर मनोज कुमार तिवारी जी, सेक्रेटरी ऑफ द फाउंडेशन श्री सुधांशु मित्तल जी, इस सभागार में उपस्थित सभी देवी और सज्जनों, आज मुझे रिस्पॉन्सिबल नेशंस इंडेक्स की व्याख्या करने वाले इस महत्वपूर्ण सम्मेलन में आप सबके बीच उपस्थित होकर हार्दिक प्रसन्नता हो रही है। सचमुच में ये इंडेक्स एक अभिनव शैक्षणिक सोच है जो एक जिम्मेदार देश की परिभाषा तय करता है। इस इंडेक्स से ये पता चलता है कि कोई देश अपने नागरिकों के साथ पूरी मानवता के प्रति कितना जिम्मेदार व्यवहार करता है। हम सभी जानते हैं कि कोई भी देश आर्थिक रूप से संपन्न होते हुए भी गैर जिम्मेदार हो सकता है, होते भी हैं। इसलिए केवल उच्च प्रति व्यक्ति आय या हम कहें कि अच्छे शासन का एक मानक नहीं हो सकता। किसी भी देश की प्रगति के सच्चे मानक के रूप में पहले ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट इंडेक्स के विकसित होने के पीछे यही मूल कारण था। इस मानक में प्रति व्यक्ति आय के अतिरिक्त स्वास्थ्य और शिक्षा को भी एक समावेशी मानदंड के रूप में शामिल किया गया था। कालांतर में आम लोगों के बीच खुशी को भी मापने के लिए हैप्पीनेस इंडेक्स का विचार अस्तित्व में आया। हमारे पड़ोसी देश भूटान और कुछ नार्डिक देश इस पैमाने पर हमेशा अग्रणी भी रहे हैं। इससे भी एक कदम आगे बढ़कर मानवता के प्रति देशों के जिम्मेदार व्यवहार को बढ़ावा देने के उद्देश्य से एक महत्वपूर्ण इंडेक्स विकसित करने के लिए मैं वर्ल्ड इंटेलेक्चुअल फाउंडेशन को बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं। इस कार्य में सहयोग करने के लिए मैं जवाहरलाल नेहरू यूनिवर्सिटी और IIM मुंबई की भी सराहना करता हूं। ये इंडेक्स एक व्यापक अध्ययन है जिसमें शासन से जुड़े कई अहम पहलुओं और नियम आधारित अंतर्राष्ट्रीय व्यवस्था के मानदंडों को शामिल किया गया। ये एक ऐसा कदम है जो अभी प्रगति पर है और भविष्य में इसकी और परख तथा बौद्धिक व्याख्याएं हो सकती है, लेकिन ये आने वाली पीढ़ियों के लिए शांतिपूर्ण और समृद्ध भविष्य के निर्माण की दिशा में एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण कदम है। देवियों और सज्जनों, हमने कुछ शरारती देशों के बारे में भी सुना है। दुनिया में कई ऐसे देश हैं, हमें और कहीं दूर जाने की जरूरत नहीं। एक देश हमारे पड़ोस में भी है। एक देश आखिरकार अपने लोगों से बनता है, लेकिन अगर कोई देश भटक जाए तो और वो इस प्रकार से काम करे जो मानवता और अपने लोगों की प्रगति के लिए हानिकारक हो, तो क्या करना चाहिए? इस दशा में जब मल्टीलेटरल फोरा भी अप्रभावी होते जा रहे हैं, तब मेरे विचार में हर देश को आंतरिक रूप से सोचना जरूर चाहिए और अपने व्यवहार को रिस्पॉन्सिबल नेशंस इंडेक्स के सार्वभौमिक रूप से स्वीकार्य कोड के अनुरूप ढालने का प्रयास करना चाहिए। और मुझे प्रसन्नता है कि वही आज हो रहा है। देवियों और सज्जनों, मानव सभ्यता के इतिहास में प्रायः किसी भी देश का आकलन उनकी सैन्य क्षमताओं, अर्थव्यवस्था के आकार और तकनीकी प्रगति के आधार पर किया जाता रहा है। लेकिन ये पैमाने चाहे कितने ही प्रभावशाली क्यों न हो, हमें इस बारे में बहुत कम जानकारी देते हैं कि कोई देश वो अपने नागरिकों के साथ कैसा व्यवहार करता है। वो दूसरे देशों के साथ कैसे संबंध रखता है और वह देश हमारी साझी धरती माँ की कितनी निष्ठा से रक्षा करता है। रिस्पॉन्सिबल नेशंस इंडेक्स या RNI हमें सामरिक या आर्थिक ताकत के लेखे जोखे से आगे बढ़कर नैतिकता की ताकत के साथ आगे बढ़ने के लिए प्रेरित करता है। यह हमें याद दिलाता है कि समृद्धि और प्रगति तभी सार्थक होती है जब उन्हें जिम्मेदारी से हासिल किया जाए, जब शक्ति का प्रयोग संयम से किया जाए और प्रभाव का प्रयोग करुणा के साथ किया जाए। देवी और सज्जनों, आज विश्व के देश परस्पर जुड़े हुए हैं। ऐसे जिम्मेदारी विहीन और नैतिकता विहीन शक्ति का प्रयोग अस्थिर और खतरनाक परिस्थिति का कारण बन सकती है। यह प्रसन्नता की बात है कि सामर्थ्य को चरित्र से जोड़ने के लिए RNI एक महत्वपूर्ण मानदंड प्रदान करता है। नैतिक और जिम्मेदारीपूर्ण व्यवहार का विचार हम भारतीयों के लिए नया नहीं है। यह हमारी सभ्यता के उन सिद्धांतों में अंतर्निहित है जो हजारों वर्षों से हमारी नैतिक और राजनैतिक सोच को दिशा दिखाती रही है। हमने हमेशा वसुधैव कुटुंबकम यानी पूरा विश्व एक परिवार है के सिद्धांत पर विश्वास किया है। हमारा परंपरा में लोका समस्ता सुखिनो भवन्तु अर्थात सभी प्राणी सर्वत्र सुखी और दुख मुक्त हों, ऐसी हम प्रार्थना करते हैं। आज भी हम इस प्रार्थना के मूल भाव के अनुसार विश्व को देखते हैं और सबकी भलाई के लिए कार्य करते हैं। हमारे लिए ताकत का अर्थ दबदबा नहीं बल्कि एक कर्तव्य है। संप्रभुता हमें अधिकार के साथ साथ जिम्मेदारी का भी बोध कराती है। कौटिल्य का अर्थशास्त्र हमें याद दिलाता है कि शासन की वैधता कमजोर लोगों को सुरक्षा और न्याय प्रदान करते हुए उनकी पीड़ा को दूर करने पर टिकी होती है। भारत का संविधान इसी दृष्टिकोण को वैधानिक स्वरूप प्रदान करता है जब वह न्याय, स्वतंत्रता, समानता, बंधुता को लोकतंत्र का सार बताता है। रिस्पॉन्सिबल नेशंस इंडेक्स भारतीय परंपरा के मूल तत्वों से आधुनिक लोकतंत्र तक की लंबी नैतिक यात्रा का एक हिस्सा है। यह हमारी सभ्यता में विद्यमान नैतिक मूल्यों को एक आधुनिक मूल्यांकन ढांचे में विश्व के सामने प्रस्तुत करता है। देवी और सज्जनों, आज विश्व ऐसी अनेक चुनौतियों का सामना कर रहा है जो देश की सीमाओं से परे है। जलवायु परिवर्तन, महामारी, साइबर क्राइम, वित्तीय संकट और युद्ध को किसी देश की सीमा में बांधना मुश्किल है। ऐसी घटनाएं दर्शाती हैं कि देशों का भाग्य परस्पर जुड़ा हुआ है और एक देश का नैतिक व्यवहार दूसरे देशों की भलाई में महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका निभा सकता है। वर्तमान समय का यह एक अजीब विरोधाभास है कि जिन देशों को सामान्यतः सबसे शक्तिशाली माना जाता है वो प्रायः अनियंत्रित उत्सर्जन, आर्थिक दबाव और युद्ध जैसे कदमों से पृथ्वी की अस्थिरता में सबसे ज्यादा योगदान देते हैं। इसका उदाहरण आज वर्तमान परिस्थितियों में हम पूरे विश्व में देख सकते हैं। RNI हमें इस विरोधाभास के अंदर झांकने का अवसर देता है। यह बताता है कि महानता का पैमाना आदेश देने की क्षमता नहीं बल्कि दायित्व निभाने की इच्छा शक्ति होना चाहिए। मेरा मानना है कि कोई भी देश जिम्मेदारी के 3 महत्वपूर्ण मानकों पर अपने आप को परख सकता है। पहला, उसकी आंतरिक जिम्मेदारी। क्या कोई देश अपने नागरिकों को भोजन, स्वास्थ्य, शिक्षा, सामाजिक सुरक्षा, न्याय सुलभ कराते हुए उनकी गरिमा की रक्षा कर रहा है? मेरा मानना है कि सामाजिक और आर्थिक लोकतंत्र के बिना राजनैतिक लोकतंत्र जीवित नहीं रह सकता। लोकतंत्र का अधिकार केवल वोट देने का अधिकार ही नहीं है बल्कि गरिमापूर्ण जीवन जीने का अधिकार भी है। यह बहुत ही प्रसन्नता की बात है कि भारत सरकार नागरिकों के जीवन को सुगम और सुविधाजनक बनाने के लिए अनेक कदम उठा रही है। उदाहरण के लिए, चाहे वो प्रधानमंत्री गरीब कल्याण योजना हो, आयुष्मान भारत योजना हो, राष्ट्रीय शिक्षा नीति हो, अटल पेंशन योजना हो या वीबी जी राम जी हो, ये सभी योजनाएं देशवासियों को गरिमापूर्ण जीवन जीने में सक्षम बना रही। दूसरा मानक है पर्यावरण के प्रति अपनी जिम्मेदारी। क्या प्रकृति को नष्ट करके किए गए विकास को हम विकास कहेंगे? बिल्कुल नहीं, क्योंकि हमें ये याद रखना होगा कि इस धरती और प्राकृतिक संपदा के हम स्वामी नहीं बल्कि संरक्षक हैं। इसे हमें सही सलामत अपनी आने वाली पीढ़ियों को सौंपना है। संतुलित जीवन शैली की अपनी सभ्यतागत भावना के साथ भारत ने लाइफ स्टाइल फॉर एनवायरनमेंट, दैट इज लाइफ, का मंत्र विश्व के सामने प्रस्तुत किया है। मुझे खुशी है कि RNI नवीकरणीय ऊर्जा, जैव विविधता और स्वच्छ पर्यावरण जैसे इस धरती को बचाने के लिए की गए प्रयासों पर बल देता है। तीसरा मानक है अन्य देशों के प्रति अपनी जिम्मेदारी। यह मानक दर्शाता है कि एक देश अपनी सीमाओं के बाहर कैसा व्यवहार करता है। क्या वह विश्व शांति में योगदान देता है या संघर्ष को बढ़ावा देता है? क्या वह टेक्नोलॉजी और व्यापार को इस तरह से बढ़ाता है जिससे दूसरे देश भी आगे बढ़ें, या ऐसी नीति अपनाता है जिससे दूसरे देश अलग थलग हो जाए? भारत ने सदैव दिखाया है कि जिम्मेदार विदेश नीति तालमेल चाहती है, अपना दबदबा नहीं। भारत सबका साथ, सबका विकास और सबका विश्वास की नीति के साथ आगे बढ़ने में विश्वास रखता है, जिसकी झलक हमारे ग्लोबल साउथ, एक्ट ईस्ट, महासागर, नेबरहुड फर्स्ट जैसे इनिशिएटिव्स में दिखती है। देवियों और सज्जनों, RNI विश्व समुदाय को इतिहास में झांकने का भी आह्वान करता है। यह दर्शाता है कि आज की असमानता की जड़ें सदियों से चले आ रहे औपनिवेशिक शोषण और पर्यावरण के दोहन में है। जो देश कभी अपनी ताकत और दबदबे का अनुचित लाभ उठाते थे, उन पर आज पर्यावरण और समानता के प्रयासों की अगुवाई करने की नैतिक जिम्मेदारी है। भारत एक ऐसा देश है जो कभी भी आक्रांता नहीं रहा। हम हमेशा संतुलन और सह अस्तित्व पर बल देते रहे। भारत हमेशा कमजोर देशों की आवाज उठाता रहा, बहुपक्षीय संस्थाओं में सुधार की मांग करता रहा, जिससे वे संस्थाएं और भी ज्यादा सहयोगी और सदस्य देशों के प्रति अधिक जिम्मेदार बन सके। देवी और सज्जनों, रिस्पॉन्सिबल नेशंस इंडेक्स प्रतिस्पर्धा बढ़ाने वाला स्कोर बोर्ड नहीं है, बल्कि नैतिक सोच का एक दर्पण है। हर देश को इस दर्पण में अपने को झांकना चाहिए और पूछना चाहिए कि क्या वह अपने नागरिकों को न्याय दे रहा है, क्या वह धरती के भविष्य को सुरक्षित रखने का प्रयास कर रहा है, क्या वह अपनी सीमाओं के बाहर शांति और सहयोग में योगदान दे रहा है। अगर RNI इन मानकों पर इन देशों को ईमानदारी से खुद को परखने में सहायता कर सके तो इस इंडेक्स का उद्देश्य पूरा जरूर होगा। ऐसे समय में जब निराशा प्रायः आशा पर हावी हो जाती है, यह इंडेक्स बेहतर रास्ता चुनने का मानव समाज की क्षमता पर विश्वास को और सुदृढ़ करता है। ताकत हमें बांट सकती है, लेकिन हमें जिम्मेदारी जोड़ती है। शक्ति एक हाथ से दूसरे हाथ में जा सकती है, लेकिन जिम्मेदारी सभी हाथों को एक समान, एक उद्देश्य के लिए एक साथ लाती है। गांधी जी के अनुसार किसी भी समाज का असली मापदंड है कि वो समाज अपने सबसे कमजोर सदस्यों के साथ कैसा व्यवहार करता है। ये खुशी की बात है कि RNI गांधी जी के इस आदर्श को शासन व्यवस्था की भाषा में मान्यता प्रदान करता है। अंत में मैं कहना चाहूँगा कि किसी देश की महानता उसकी धन, संपदा या हथियारों से नहीं, बल्कि उसकी नैतिक सोच से याद की जाती है। उस भय से नहीं जो वह पैदा करता है, बल्कि उस उम्मीद से जो वो उत्पन्न करता है। उसकी शक्ति की स्मृति से अधिक उसकी करुणा की स्मृति टिकाऊ होती है। मेरी कामना है कि RNI विश्व को ऐसी नैतिक सोच को फिर से खोजने में मदद करे। ये हर देश को, चाहे वो बड़ा हो या छोटा हो, अमीर हो या गरीब हो, समझदारी, संयम और सहानुभूति के साथ काम करने के लिए प्रेरित करता रहेगा। धन्यवाद। जय हिंद।
May I ask this House to give a standing ovation to the Honorable former President? It's been a brilliant invocation. Thank you so much, sir. मैं अब वर्ल्ड इंटेलेक्चुअल फाउंडेशन के अध्यक्ष प्रोफेसर जगदीश मुखी जी से निवेदन करूंगा कि वो समाप्त करेंगे इसको।
Distinguished guest, Shri Ramnath Kovind ji, Honorable former President of India, esteemed speakers, scholars, diplomats, policymakers, ladies and gentlemen. As we come to close this intellectually rich and deeply reflective evening, I do so with a sense of gratitude and also with a sense of responsibility. Gratitude because today's deliberations have brought together voices from academia, public policy, diplomacy, and institutional leadership in a manner that is increasingly rare. Responsibility because the ideas articulated here are not merely academic, they speak to the future conduct of nations in an increasingly fragile world. From the expert roundtable earlier today to the global panel discussion and finally to this formal launch, one theme has resonated consistently, that the power without responsibility is unsustainable and the responsibility without measurement risks remaining rhetorical. The Responsible Nation Index attempts to address precisely this tension. What we witnessed today was not merely unveiling of a report, but the culmination of a rigorous multi-institutional, multi-year intellectual exercise, an effort grounded in scholarship, evidence, and ethical reflection. I wish to place on record my deep appreciation for institutional collaboration that made this endeavor possible. The World Intellectual Foundation, driven by the belief that ideas themselves are a form of global public good. Jawaharlal Nehru University, whose working committee brought conceptual depth, disciplinary diversity, and academic rigor to this very arithmetic of the index. And IIM Mumbai, whose independent validation ensured methodological robustness and statistical credibility. And importantly, Dr. Ambedkar International Center, our valued event partner, which has provided not merely this distinguished venue, but an institutional setting that embodies the very values of the Responsible National Index seeks to advance: justice, dignity, constitutional morality, and accountability of the power. That this index is being launched at DAIC is not incidental. It is profoundly symbolic. As we have heard today, RNI does not seek to replace existing global indices, nor does it seek to pass judgment. Instead, it asks a deeper question: how do nations treat their own people? How do they steward the planet? And how do they conduct themselves beyond the borders? By structuring responsibility into 3 pillars, 7 dimensions, 15 aspects, and 58 indicators. The index demonstrates that the ethics can be measured not perfectly but meaningfully. And importantly, the early insights remind us that responsibility is not the monopoly of wealth or power. It is shaped by choices, institutions, and values. It is particularly meaningful that this initiative has emerged from India not as a claim of moral authority, but as an intellectual offering. India's civilization tradition has always viewed authority as inseparable from duty and sovereignty as inseparable from accountability. The Responsible Nation Index translates this timeless wisdom into contemporary global and empirical framework. That, to my mind, is its most enduring contribution. Let me also emphasize that this is not a one-time publication. The Responsible Nation Index is a living research endeavor on that will evolve through annual updates, scholarly critiques, policy engagements, and continued global dialogue. Its success will not be measured by headless alone, but highlights alone, but by whether it influences how responsibility is understood, expected, and eventually practiced. Friends, in a world where trust is eroding and institutions are under strain, legitimacy will increasingly flow not from dominance but from conduct. If today's conversations are any indication, the Responsible Nation Index has begun an important journey, one that invites nations to reflect before they compete, to cooperate before they coerce, and to act with foresight rather than force. On behalf of the World Intellectual Foundation, I thank our chief guest for lending institutional dignity and moral gravitas to this occasion. Our academic partners for their unwavering rigor, our speakers, participants, and audience for engaging with seriousness and sincerity. We extend our heartfelt thanks to Dhanush Infotech, Sharda University, and Philatex India Limited for their generous support and partnership in making this event possible. The commitment reflects the important role that responsible institutions, academic and corporate alike, play in advancing ideas that serve the larger public good. With that, I formally bring this program to a close. Thank you for being part of this movement. Jai Hind.
इससे पहले कि आप लोगों से निवेदन करूं कि नेशनल एंथम के लिए सब खड़े होंगे, मैं दो चीज कहना चाहता हूं। हमारे बीच रामलाल जी बैठे हैं जो कि इस वर्ल्ड इंटेलेक्चुअल फाउंडेशन के कर्ता धर्ता रहे हैं। इनके प्रोत्साहन से और इन्हीं की दिशा निर्देश में हम लोगों ने आगे बढ़े हैं। और नरेंद्र कुमार जी को एक बार फिर याद करना चाहूंगा मैं। आज उन्होंने ही इसकी कल्पना करी थी। आज वो हमारे बीच में नहीं है, लेकिन ये कार्यक्रम उनके लिए एक श्रद्धांजलि है हमारी। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और सब लोग अब राष्ट्रीय गान के लिए खड़े हो जाएं।
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता। पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंगा। विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा। तव शुभ नामे जागे, तव शुभ आशीष मांगे। गाहे तव जय गाथा, जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
भारत माता की, भारत माता की, भारत माता की।